In this high-energy episode of the Stop Doing Stupid Stuff podcast, host Tim Keefe chats with organizational psychologist Dr. Trent Salvaggio about revolutionizing employee engagement. The dynamic duo dives into why traditional surveys fail and how companies can actually listen to their people. They share eye-opening stories from Johns Hopkins and Turkish businesses that transformed their workplace by genuinely responding to employee feedback. With global engagement hovering at a shocking 30%, Tim and Trent reveal how simple actions can dramatically boost productivity and create thriving workplaces. This conversation crackles with practical wisdom and game-changing insights for leaders ready to build trust and empower their teams. Let's dive right in.
Hi, everybody. This is Tim Keefe with Transform CX and Stop Doing Stupid Stuff Global, and I'm here with Trent Salvaggio. Trent is a organizational psychologist. Yes, probably should be a clinical psychologist if he's on the same call with me, but we'll work on some of his clinical hours here in a bit. But Trent's here to talk about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, which is how we listen or how we engage with our employees. And I think the opportunity today is really talking about, what's the risk or what are the tools that we have and what are some of the challenges of those tools today. So with that, let me just tee this back over to Mr. Trent and let's get this started.
Great. Thanks for the introduction. Happy to be here. Yeah, a fun conversation today about the age-old employee interview, the employee survey, the annual survey that we all know and love, what it looks like today, and maybe what it's going to look like or should look like in the years to come.
Yeah, I love the comment, like, well, we're not going to hire anybody. That isn't that the CEO of Klarna right now saying, I'm not hiring anybody. I'm going to replace everybody with AI. Okay. Well, hopefully not everybody's going to have that same attitude, because if nobody has a job, I don't know who's going to buy the goods that all the AI is manufacturing. But again, I like to think people are thinking this all the way through, that we have to have a viable economy as well as a lot of technology.
That downstream thinking, so overrated sometimes, right?
Well, I really, as an executive I worked with one time, said so elegantly, just because we can do it doesn't mean we should do it. But really good point. And I think there's this whole thing about, and I think employees right now are really struggling because the messaging they're getting is very all over the map. One message could be, and without naming names, but you have to come back to the office 5 days a week. And in order for us to understand whether or not you're going to continue with our company. And it's not an overt or a veiled threat at all. It's very overt, saying, don't come back to the office full time. You're going to get fired, or you won't be considered for any future promotions and blah, blah, blah. And a lot of people are like, well, okay, but my job, how is my job going to change going back into the office? That's going to allow me to do it more effectively. If that's the case, maybe I can buy into that. But a lot of times it's, the reason for, everybody coming back to the office. I'm not saying that I really do think it depends. Unfortunately, every company or every organization may have to approach this differently depending on their culture, what they do, most importantly, and how they do it, being a big part of that. But when you think about the fact that, 5 years ago, almost to the week, right? From March 13th was the day California shut down in 2020. I remember it very clearly because I didn't think it could really happen. And, we were all sitting around going, and I remember having this conversation with several people, this is going to be one of the world's largest social experiments that we're going to see. Because what happened in the course of, in some cases, 72 hours, in some cases, it was a few weeks, companies had to radically shift to a work from home model. Even if they'd never done it before. Some companies had some of it, either rudimentary in place or they had it as part of their disaster recovery. And so they were in a much better place, right? We've worked with our employees. We know how to do remote access. We have security in place. Pretty good. But what didn't happen necessarily was that leadership and organizational communication didn't evolve very quickly, I think. And as a result, you had a lot of isolation. A lot of people feeling like, I don't know what's expected of me. I don't know really who I should go to because, what do we do as humans, right? Well, I shouldn't say we all, but I know one of the things that I do when I get into a new organization, whether it's when I, went to an academy or got on a new ship or whatever, you you always start in the same place. I don't know any of these people. And so how do I start very quickly figuring out who's who and who are my natural alliances going to be, right? There's obviously the people I work with every day that I want to make sure that we have at least a viable working relationship with each other. But then there are going to be other people that may not be obvious alliances that you want to have. And then one thing I learned many, many years ago, there were a few people that you definitely didn't want to have a bad relationship with. That was the person who paid you, the person who fed you, and the person who stuck needles in you. Those are three people that you tried to stay on their good side if you could. But so we go into this organization, any organization, and we're trying to figure out who our alliances are, who we should work with, who we can get things done with. But then there's the other part, which is I really think this blew up during the work from home. And I think this is one of the drivers for return to office, is that we all need to be aligned around the same mission. Now, I would argue also that many companies, if you asked them what that mission was, they would struggle to articulate it in a measurable way, but they probably have a pretty good mission statement. But now we're saying to people, okay, you have to be back in the office, 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. You have to badge in, you have to badge out. And during the time that you're at the desk, we're actually going to be monitoring your physical inputs to your device. Boy, that sounds like so much fun. I can't wait to do that. That sounds horrible, right? Like it just, why am I here? Oh, I'm doing attendance. Now, some people love that, right? I used to, and maybe I was one of those people that, I kind of liked being around the big cheeses, right? Because it was kind of fun to maybe get their attention or be able to be around when decisions were being made. And I used to call it doing jumping jacks in front of the boss, right? Look at me, look at me. And that's essentially, in many ways, that was the old school model. Remember, who's our most valuable employee? Well, geez, Tim's in before everybody and he stays till after everybody leaves. So he must be really valuable. I could have been writing a book during that time period. Nobody would know, and you'd be like, and again, that was one of the things I'm sure you remember when Yahoo, I'm trying to think of the woman who came in as the chief operating officer, but she wrote that book about leaning in and, how it was really important that they had to take a firm rein around that company because so many people had been working at home. They were running separate careers in different businesses, et cetera. And it all became about, well, that's the employee's fault. Mm-hmm. But I would argue, no, that's not the employee's fault. The employees will do what they do. People will do what they do. They'll fill in the time. You give them, if they're not busy, or they're not engaged, let's keep that word in mind. If they're not engaged with the work that you're giving them to do, they'll go find something else that's engaging, whether that's writing a book or starting a side gig, or they're doing reaction videos on YouTube, whatever. But that's what's lighting their candle. That's what's getting their creative sense going. And if the work that you're giving them to do is not that, they may stay. In fact, they may have no choice to stay, because one of the few ways that, that we can get healthcare is we have to go work for a company that provides healthcare insurance. As an independent, it's very difficult to do, right? Like if you go to Kaiser or you go to a healthcare provider as, even if you're like us, right, and you have your own, corporation, you're not going to get a very good program unless you have scale. And even then, you have to have scale and you have to be willing to put a lot of money into it. You're looking at a couple of percentage points of your operating margin are just in healthcare costs.
Sure.
And that's why people come and work, because that's the only place they can get healthcare, even it's moderate healthcare. They don't really care about the work you're asking them to do. And by the way, they'll do just enough to stay off your radar, right? Like that, that's that quiet quitting, or we used to call retired in place. Like, I'm doing what's the minimum that I need to do. And kind of going back to the article that you were talking about, is how do we know where people are, right? I mean, most of these companies, the CEO rarely, might do a town hall once a quarter. That's, and for most people, even if it is all return to the office and everybody's in the same room, how many people are really engaged in that town hall event?
Yeah.
Probably the executive put it on and the team that helped put it on. And then engagement falls off pretty quick after that. And then, but I had to be there. Okay, that's great. But, I feel like the kid in school, you open up the binder and he's got the novel that he's reading rather than the schoolwork. So how do we know? So Trent, I mean, in your work, as you think about these organizations and some of these people that are in roles like mine, where you want to think that you're a respected executive, but are you? And how would you know?
Yeah, so I mean, it's funny that everything we're talking about here comes down to one really core principle, right? It's about that level of connectedness, and it's about communication. And so
Yes.
you talk about, the CEO comes out once a year and does a town hall. Well, why? What's really driving that behavior? Well, at the core of that executive is saying, I need to talk to my people, and here's how I'm going to do it. This
Right.
one way, top down. I'm going to share my vision, and dramatically, somehow magically, I'm going to get buy-in from everybody. And there you go. I've done my job as a leader within the organization.
And no questions, by the way, right?
No.
Questions have to be submitted in advance.
Because that's a great way to build trust with your workforce. But anyway, as we sit back and we look at this and we see the absurdity of it, it's been the de facto method of communication across organizations for years. That top-down executive given the town hall,
Yeah.
or the, hey, employee, tell me what you think. Here's 10 questions I want to ask you. And they're one way, there's no communication, there's no context around it. And so you get exactly the answers to only the questions that you think you're asking, without any explanation around it, without any of the things that really matter.
Well, and of course, and the article pointed out, and I think it's really true. There are a lot of people who worry about retaliation, even if the survey is quote unquote anonymous. But let's face it, if there's only 30 people in a work group, it's pretty easy to figure out who's who and who's more likely to give what answers based on the way they interact with you in the day to day. But again, to your point, it's like, okay, our employees, you think about like who knows better about what's working and what's not working at the point of interface with your customer. Your employees do, right? Nobody.
Yes.
And your customer does. Those are the two people who know. And yet most companies don't want to talk to either of those people. They say they do. Like we do 1 million customer surveys.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I don't travel as much as I used to, but I used to fly United a ton. And every single interaction with United, you get another survey, how was your boarding? How was the drop off? How was the club? How was whatever? In the beginning, I used to be a really good customer and fill that out. And then I realized after a while, one, I never got any kind of response, not even a response saying, oh, congratulations for being a 100% response winner, but nothing. And let alone ones where I did say there is something wrong here and I would like to talk to an executive or to someone with a position of authority. And of course, there was never any response. So what are they telling me? That this, to your point, this is one way, right? And they're going to take the answers that they like,
Mm-hmm.
and throw away everything else. And then they're going to publish that 98% of our customers are satisfied or very satisfied. And you're like, okay, let's start that again. So why aren't we flipping that model to understand why are the 2% of our customers saying we do a crap job, or the 3% or the 4%? Because that 3 or 4% are the ones that then, particularly in the world that we live in today, have an extremely powerful voice. I remember back in the 90s, we used to say one bad review would be repeated to 50 people. Now it's got to be 5,000 people because of just the power of the internet. And I'm not even a big internet guy. I can go on LinkedIn and bitch and get, several hundred impressions.
Mm-hmm.
That means at least those 700 people heard me bitch, which is, that's
it's an amazing
not a good
scale
thing.
when you think about that, right? Compared to what it was just 10 years ago.
And people that start to use the system can get pretty smart about it. I remember one time I was having a problem with the bank, who actually it was an airline credit card, and believe it or not, the bank that was supporting the card wasn't taking any calls in customer service because they had a big problem. They were getting so blown out of the water. So I go online, find the most senior executive for the airline that's name is on the card, and send him an email saying, "Hi, you don't know me, but I'm one of your credit card customers, and this is what's going on." 5 minutes later, I get a call from the CEO's support team at that bank. But to your point, that's a level of agency that everybody has if they choose to use it. But again, going back to your employees, so how do we find a way that we can actively engage them, because if they're engaged, if they're excited about what they're doing, whatever your mission could be, like, for us, one of the things that we do is we do have a product in this customer experience space. So that's one of the things that people on that product team are really excited about. Like, they want to see customers using it. They want to see the weekly reviews of feedback from the employees. And then how is that being processed so that it becomes actionable? Because, one of the things that is, like I said earlier, I'll do surveys, but if I don't feel like anybody's listening, what's the point? And I think that's the same thing with like the annual survey or semi-annual survey that we used to get at every company, right? 150 questions, quote anonymous, but you had the first thing you had to enter was your employee number.
Your name or employee number. Totally anonymous.
Right? So yeah, it's 100% anonymous, except please enter your employee number here. Okay. And then, okay, that colors some of my responses right off the bat. Like, how honest can I be? But then more importantly, then what happens to it? Well, it takes 3 or 4 months for the third-party company to process the results. They identify the top 20 trends. Then we form a committee. That committee gets together and says, we're going to have action plans against these 20 trends, of which nothing ever gets done. And these people have other jobs, and another year goes by. And it's time for another survey. Versus what we're trying to do, and we think it's important enough that and I think it's worth beating a drum here a little bit about it, is that our program is not meant to be anonymous. Whoa, what are you talking about? Not anonymous. No, this is a place for employees to speak with their voice. And the way we do it is it's every week. It's a 3-question survey. It takes 15 seconds to answer. It's built around a Gallup organizational model that gets at looking at an employee engagement across a bunch of different attributes, from communication to opportunity to training, et cetera. Now, people go, well, that's going to be scary, right? Like, what if they have bad things to say? I can guarantee you they're going to have bad things to say. You want them to have bad things to say. Why? Because you then want to be able to fix some of those bad things. And you look for the simple bad things, like the color paint in the break room makes me nauseous. Let's fix that.
Great.
Right? Or, all the cubicles that are on the south side of the building are so hot in the afternoon that we can't sit there. I'm sure you've been there, right? In one of those buildings. And so what do? Well, I remember I was with this company. It's exactly the bitch. So we went out and spent 40 grand and had them come in and put screens on the inside of the glass that could be adjusted so that people weren't getting boiled out of their offices. Oh, well, that's kind of actionable. And I said, yeah. And guess what? People respected that they had a voice and somebody did something about it. And that doesn't mean like you have to cure world hunger, because there are going to be those types of issues too, but they can be very discreet. And we had a really powerful one of our, and this is referenceable, so I'll use their name. One of our clients is Johns Hopkins University Medical Institute. And we're working with their client patient experience team. And in this group, they had a woman who was one of their top performers. And every week, her first question is, how was your week at work? Did you have a good week at work? And she was hitting strongly agree, strongly agree, strongly agree. And then boom, it went down to middle, went to no, to not a good week. And then there's a comments section. And she put in the comments, this is not work related, but I'm having personal issues that are making it very difficult for me. So first off, a lot of companies, wouldn't have had a way for her to express that. Wouldn't even have known that she was deteriorating in her attitude until it's too late, she quits or something bad happens. Number two, that this gave the management of the team an opportunity to really lean in and go, but what's really going on? I know you're saying it's not work, and we're not saying I can fix everything, but if you're willing to share with me, maybe there is something we can do to help, because we value you as an employee. You're one of our top performers. So she said, my car was stolen, and public transportation in Baltimore from her neighborhood was very sketchy. And she was terrified going to and from work every day. Okay, now a lot of companies would have said, you're right, that's not our issue, and we wish you luck, good luck with that. But this manager said, one, he had the authority to do it. And two, he took a very simple thing where he said, you know what, let me take a quick look. It's $20 each way on Uber. I'm going to give you a company certificate for $20, for $40 a day until you get your car returned so that you can come to work and not have to worry about this.
Wow.
For $40 a day. Now, first off, imagine how that individual felt. First, that somebody listened and somebody stepped in that did something they didn't have to do. Number two, how many people do you think she told at work about what they did?
I was going to say, think about the scale of that effect right there. Because, I mean, going out there, if I'm that employee, I'm screaming that to the rooftops, to everybody around me. It's that, you know what, my work didn't have to do this, but look, they care about me not just as an employee, but as a person. Oh man, and what does that do for my level of engagement and to the people who hear that story? What's it do to their level of respect and trust that they have in their employer? What's that going to do downstream, like even 2 or 3 levels, right? Now that employee who hears the story says, well, maybe it's worth the time for me to fill out this survey because I know they're going to do something. I know my voice really matters.
Well, and that's what's important, right? And I try to call it the 3 legs of the problem, right? But the first leg is, do I have a voice? Is there a way for me as a manager to listen to my team in a non-threatening way, right? And so you kind of go, okay. Now it was really interesting because we had this. So when we do demos for clients of this product, we use our own internal data, which can be, now that I've been doing it for a while, I'm more comfortable about it. But initially I was like, what are we doing here? Anyway, we're giving a presentation. I was in Istanbul, of all places, and we're giving a presentation to a huge supermarket chain, 51,000 employees. I mean, a huge opportunity for us. Very, very excited to work with us. They use Great Place to Work and they use other tools, but they see the need for something different. Anyway, we're doing the demonstration and we had this similar situation where here was this person who was like solid, like, great, I love work, I love work, I love work. And then suddenly, nope, not so good, not so good, not so good. And like for 4 weeks, she was trending down. And I was just like going, oh, isn't it like my little group? Like I'm looking at our organizational structure. It's a person who direct reports to me that I talk to every day and is not feel comfortable that she can tell me about her struggle, but she can answer the survey about her struggle, which is also a generational thing. Gen Z, millennials and Gen Z and Gen A are going to be even worse. They don't even know how, in many cases, to have those verbal conversations, particularly if they're viewed in any way as confrontational. Like, I'm not happy, or you need to give me a raise, or my parking spot sucks, or you tore up the parking lot and I have to walk 3 blocks in to get to work every day, and I have to park on the street where I'm worried that my car is going to be broken into. I'm using my own personal experiences to describe how the things can ruin your day at work. Have nothing to do directly with work. But, so do I have a way to listen? In a way that they can embrace? And I think, to your point, part of that is you got to demonstrate that you are willing to listen and you are willing to act, even if the act is acknowledging what they're saying. So we had a client also in Turkey. Very interesting that, because I would have said, wow, Turkey, would that be a market where there would be a lot of interest in employee engagement? And amazingly enough, very much so. Same as, kind of similar situation. It was a group of software engineers. And Turkey, if you're aware, has had tremendous problems with inflation over the last several years, hyperinflation. So, people's income is worth dramatically less now than what it was even 2 years ago, 3 years ago, like 25%. Inflation is everywhere, shrinkflation, where they shrink the size of the products to keep the price the same, all of that. Everybody's living with it every day. And so these engineers were saying, look, we need to have our comp adjusted to reflect what's happening with with the value of our money. And you can imagine a privately held company. You can imagine how this is going over. Like, what do you mean I got to pay more money just because they got to pay more money? But what happened was, because we ran the survey for about 4 months, they were seeing the comments, and the people were pretty good. I mean, for every person who wrote something that I think was less than professional, most of the comments were actually very professional. They were like, I like working here. I value the work I do here, but if my pay is not adjusted, I'm going to have to start looking for other work. And so as they started to see more and more of those comments, they recognized they had to do something. So number one, They could acknowledge, yes, we understand the wage pressure. It's not an easy problem to solve, but we're working on it. And it took them a couple of months, and then they were able to make some adjustments that they announced actually in like Q4 of last year. But again, they created a safe voice. They listened to that voice, and they acted on what they're hearing. And I think that's got to be first step. Now, look, human beings are. I think Andreas says it so elegantly sometimes. If you can get 2%, 100% engaged, you're doing pretty good.
Oh, yeah.
And then we looked at that Gallup. I'm sure you've seen that Gallup report, and there's a new one out. I got to get it. But the one for the reporting data in 2023 and later talked about employee engagement globally was 30%.
That's it.
Yeah, so we're sitting here going, oh my God, like if I can take this workforce, so let's say I'm spending $1 million a month, right? Because that's not that far off. If I'm spending $1 million a month for a workforce that's 30% engaged, that means roughly 70% of my labor cost is at risk. Well, if I went to somebody and told them that, hey, you know that factory you just built, it's only running at 30% efficiency, they'd probably burn it down. Right, because that would be like terrible.
It's unacceptable by anybody's standards.
It's a terrible use of resources, and yet here we are. Right now,
one of the company's biggest cost drivers, we're willing to accept 30% efficiency.
Exactly, and then what drives engagement is really fascinating. Is it all about the work, right? You know, making the work interesting, which can be hard because those are two words that don't go well together. You know, interesting and work. But, you know, it's so we've tried a couple of things in our group that have actually kind of worked out surprisingly well, in that we had a couple of like almost sidebar projects. Like, we did a book. We've done a couple of books. If you're familiar with Stop Doing Stupid Stuff, we're actually a book publishing house, among other things. Again, that wasn't the original business plan, but it's become the case because we're getting a lot of great content. And we're finding this is a great way to tell our story and articulate our value proposition with some of our guests and other people that also have some really good information to bring to market. So now we're publishing books. So we had a book signing for one of the group's Teresa team that had done this. And, I probably, if you'd asked me a couple of weeks ago, I would have been, God, we're burning a lot of energy on this thing. And is that really a direct tie to our business objectives in terms of sales revenue growth and customer conversion? And the answer would have been, on the surface, no, this is stupid. Why are we wasting this time? And again, I'm not going to take credit for being brilliant, but as an after effect, I saw that work, which had that team so engaged and they were so creative and they're building, swag and banners and bringing in sponsors and raising money. And they were so engaged that I think I gained that 25 or 30% efficiency above the 30, right? Now they're operating at 60% because they get to do stuff they like to do. And if that costs me 10% of my already wasted labor,
best 10% you've ever spent.
It's a sunk cost anyway, right? And by leaning into what excites them, which isn't, and by the way, isn't foosball tables and climbing walls and free lunches. It's the ability to be creative and do stuff that I enjoy doing. And we've actually turned the books into like a perk. Have you ever thought about being an author? Well, you come work with us, and depending on what your level of expertise is, you might be at the very least a contributing author, if not a co-author in a book that's going to get published in this area of expertise. Holy crap. How many companies do that? And we're not, it's not like, oh, the CEO's name's going to be on every book. Well, no, definitely not. But more importantly, I want to see everybody on our team have that, in their LinkedIn profile, author, holy crap, or podcaster or influencer or creator or founder. And I'd love it if 20 years from now, long after I'm gone, that people are still working here, that it's a world of side gigs and highly engaged people that are doing stuff that they like to do, part of which just happens to be what we do as a team. I'm not stupid enough to think that I can engage thousands of people 100% of their engagement. I mean, I guess you could, break out the whip and do the classic, the beatings will continue until the morale improves, or I could lock everybody up and say you have to sleep overnight in the office. Not sustainable. It's I mean, it's not.
Yeah.
And
Well, see, and I look at this now from the organizational perspective, right? So you've talked about how much you can engage an individual by allowing them to do those things that they individually like to do, and to have their name on a book. Like, what an honor for somebody. But I look at that now from that organizational kind of network analysis, and I say, what does that do for everybody who works around that person? It's like, oh, wow, look what they were able to do. I work for an organization where somebody who's in my position can aspire to these things. And for them to be able to see those in real life right in front of them, like, what does that do for that spread of that infectious engagement that you're going to see across an organization? That's what's exciting about it.
It really is. And look, I'm incredibly honored to work with a great, amazing group of people, and they continue to amaze me every day. And it is that when people feel like they're being respected. We actually have a culture of gratitude. We talk about it on a regular basis. And Andreas and I took this back decades. I'm sure you've talked with Andreas about it. But, people are like, oh, why should I thank people for doing their job? And I'm going, because they don't have to do their job. That's why you should thank them for doing it. I remember when we had the government shutdown and going to TSA and making it a point to thank everybody there for being there, because they weren't getting paid. And they could very easily have said, no, I'm staying home and I don't care if you can't travel today. So, and people go, well, that's just kind of stupid. And I go, oh, you can feel how you feel about it. But I think saying thank you carries incredible weight. And I don't think we do it enough. We definitely don't do it sometimes to the people who really deserve it. I just recently went through a series of medical things, and I was calling into the office, for one of my appointments. And I just happened to say, I really wanted to thank, the woman who was on the phone and everybody else who was involved, because, you've just made me feel like I was the only person, and blah, blah. And she goes, no one ever thanks us. And it made me realize that we sometimes don't. So I actually put together a short video and put it out on LinkedIn to, everybody I could think of at Kaiser, and named as many of the surgeons or as many as the medical staff as I could. But I mean, it's like trying to thank an NFL team, right? It's hundreds of people that all together make up whatever happened. But again, taking that moment, one, I think it feels good for you personally when you get to do that, right? At least for me, it does. And even if they don't respond, it's just like, makes me go, hey, I took a second to do that, put a smile on my face and say, thank you. Or I remember going through a security line one time, and it was a younger guy, and he was all stressed. And I was just like, you know what? Why don't you just both take a deep breath? And it was just really funny. He was like, no one ever stops to ask me how I'm feeling. I'm like, yeah, just take a deep breath, and then you can pat me down and we'll be all good, right? But that's all it takes sometimes. And so so again, going back to kind of summarize the stuff I think the article, we haven't really talked to it very much, but the article's risk was you got to be careful with surveys, that they may or may not be giving you a clear view of what's going on. They may be biased because people are afraid, or they may be biased because they don't trust. And as a company, I think you have to acknowledge that, and you have to build trust by listening and acting. That's how you build trust, not just by saying, hey, fill out the form. Yeah, no, nobody trusts you. Nobody believes you. But fill out the form, and then the next week you say, hey, guys, we got a 40% response on the issues. Here are the top 3 things that everybody brought up. Here's the thing I'm going to work on. That's all you got to do. And then you do that a couple of weeks, and then people start saying, oh, wait. And what we've seen is participation starts to tick up. The engagement in terms of if you leave the comments box open, we don't do that for all clients because some don't, they're not there yet. But once the comment boxes are open and people feel that they can really say more than just answer the question, or they can offer an opinion, or, things like, it was actually Hopkins. One of the first things they brought up, one of their employees, was, our IVR at the front end that our customers have to go through before they get to us as patient experience people is very complicated, and they don't get it right. And it's got all different voices in it. And guess what they did? They were like, you know what? We really need to stop, sit down, clean up the IVR, because I don't know if you're familiar with that technology. It has a tendency to get to be the redheaded stepchild, and that, nobody wants to talk about it. They'll go in and change a prompt with, a different voice, and then they call it done. And so when you clean that stuff up, and when the employees could see that their comment resulted in action that resulted in a better end user experience, holy crap. Right. And it doesn't have to be expensive, because companies are afraid, oh, I'm going to hear all this bad stuff, and then we're going to have to deal with, and you're like, yeah, but the bad stuff is getting said whether you're listening or not. I mean, just get over it.
I'm oddly suspicious of any company that says that they have like 90% of their employees engaged, because that tells me right off the bat that either they're only hearing from 10% of their employees, or those employees are so scared and so untrusting that they're just going to lie to no end, and you'll never understand what's really happening.
Well, even my one employee corporation, I wouldn't say that we're 90% engaged. So but I think, Trent, you're right on. So I think that to summarize this, if I may, or at least throw my 2 cents out, I'd love to get your thoughts on it. But I really do think that for any organization, whether it's a company, whether it's public sector, it's a not-for-profit, whatever, the most important role of leadership, I think, is that you've got to create an open channel, and you got to be willing to listen. I mean, it doesn't mean you have to be happy. Like I always tell people, I'm open for criticism. I'm going to tell you right up front, I may not be happy with the criticism, and I may disagree with it, but I still feel, and I want to put out there, that I will listen to it. And if you can support the criticism with, concrete examples, I'm less likely to be reactive and more likely go, oh, okay, what do I do to fix that? Because then I can, and then I can be responsive.
Yeah. Along the same thing, we've talked around the idea here a couple of times, but it's really, it's about that level of trust, right? That I trust you enough that I can be honest and not fear retaliation. I trust you enough that you're going to listen to what I say and do something with that. It's going to be meaningful and actionable. And what we've seen is that long-held social contract between employer and employee has really deteriorated over, a lot in just the last, 5-10 years.
I don't think it exists anymore. I don't think anybody, I'm making a broad statement. I just think, to your point, I don't think there's any trust there. People don't trust the big bosses, even in small companies, because they don't think that the boss's alignment is my alignment,
Yes.
and you have to be really careful about that. Like, what are you saying? I mean,
well, if you look at a lot of the academic research now, it all points to the exact same thing, is that employees now view interactions with their employer as a risk as opposed to an opportunity. And so what are they doing? They become more risk averse. I'm less likely to tell you what I think, because the only thing I think is going to happen is something bad is going to happen because of our interaction. That's not a relationship.
Well, it's not, and it's not a new problem, by the way. I wish it was. I would love to blame this on all post-pandemic, but it's not. This has been going on, for as long as we've been piling rocks up and trying to sell them to each other. And so it really is a very interesting challenge. And I think one is employees don't trust the people they work for, in many cases, a lot of good reasons. And then the other side of it is, unfortunately, a lot of the people that are in leadership roles, whether they volunteer or got there or how they were hired or whatever, really don't have the tools they need in today's world.
It's the case of the superstar employee becoming the supervisor, and nobody taking the time to teach them how to lead effectively in this really new, complicated world of work.
That's very true. In fact, that's great. Another segue into one of our books, but yeah, it's kind of exactly how our leadership book is coming out with is focused on exactly that scenario, which is, congratulations, you just got promoted. Now what? And the answer is, I don't know what, right? Like, maybe there's a self-paced PowerPoint presentation on how to have a difficult conversation, maybe, if I'm lucky, but probably not even that. And now, of course, most companies have wiped out middle management because they, quote unquote, didn't see the value. And so spans of control are much bigger, 50 to 80 to 100. And so how much coaching can anybody do? How much? Yeah. And leads back to the whole other conversation. Oh, we want everybody in the office because that's how we rebuild our company spirit. And I'm like, okay. I mean, and
I think
again,
those organizations all the time, if you have to have people back in the office to maintain a strong culture, you never had a strong culture to begin with.
no, I think that's, and again, I think there are places where return to office and maybe and working in an office environment can have real value and be
Oh,
very meaningful.
100%.
I also think there are jobs and talent situations where you really have to look at what the individual is doing and maybe even think about how the individual evolves. I mean, I remember I was doing a big project with Unum Insurance Company. You may be familiar with them. They're out of Charlotte, but they had a big contact center up in Maine, in Portland, Maine. And one of the things that I thought that they did really well is that if you were an agent in their customer service center, which is a horrible job, right? Like these are the people who get the calls about everything from, I just found a life insurance policy for my father that died last year or died a month ago. How do I claim this? To, we're denying your policy that would have paid for your child's special schooling, but that's been denied, blah, blah, blah. Very, very difficult calls to make. And in a lot of companies, they almost treat people like in the contact centers as second-class citizens. I've been at banks where when they open a job, everybody in the bank can apply except people from the contact center. And yet you kind of go, but who knows better about who your customers are than the person who talks to 20 or 30 a day?
Yes.
So what these guys did at Unum that I thought was really important was they would rotate people out of those high pressure customer facing jobs, based on performance. But the idea would be then rotate them over into like claims, which is less time sensitive, but equally business sensitive to make sure that the claims are properly processed, et cetera. And then the idea was like start to rotate back and forth, but start to give people paths for career development that many companies just, in all honesty, don't have. They talk the game, but they don't really have. Like I just mentioned, I can think of a big bang in Latin America. If you were a contact center agent, you could not apply for internal job openings. Part of that is that they were difficult to find contact center agents, but the implication, the way it was handled and communicated, was that you weren't smart enough to be in these more traditional 4-year degree management. You're going to be a banker or a private banker or whatever. No, you're not. And yet you're the one who's talking to customers all day, every day. So I think that creating real future and engagement for employees is critical. And boy, have we gone long on our podcast today, Mr. Trent. You're not invited back ever again.
That's completely understandable.
No, I'm kidding. These are, I love what we're talking about here. And I think it's so critical, and which is one of the reasons why, we as a company kind of went from being a pure customer experience company, which we had been for many, many years, to really leaning in to say, that we've got to call out the role of the employee in this, and we've got to recognize that employee engagement has direct results in terms of company profitability, company effectiveness, and we're actually now talking to some industrial environments like shipboard, maritime environments, oil rigs, et cetera, where the different engagement can result in either good or bad safety. So employees that are engaged tend to operate, have fewer accidents.
Yes.
Employees that are disengaged have a higher likelihood for accidents, like what happened up at the Exxon Valdez, which was really a momentary lapse of engagement, resulted in whatever that ended up being, a $3 billion accident for Exxon. So, this engagement is not just a nice to have thing, and is a direct contribution to business profitability, business growth and retention, as well as, I think I could, and it would be really interesting to do some of the study on this. Bet you companies with higher employee engagement numbers have fewer lawsuits.
So we have the conversation. We have the topic for our next conversation. That's the rise of the chief talent management officer and how important that role is going to be.
Well,
in this new future of work.
Well, and I think it's a really interesting one because we do a lot of work with chief human resources officers, and what is that role like? Is that because my friends in Istanbul were great, like 51,000 employees, we got 20 people in HR, and everything that HR's role is get people hired legally, right? So we have appropriate things because they have litigation in Turkey as well. And pretty much once the employee is hired, the next time HR sees them is when they quit or they get fired or something blows up really bad, right? So the company is relying on all those managers and those tiers of management to appropriately engage and teach and do all the things we just talked about. It's not an HR role because HR just doesn't have the time and resources. They're over there. Their goal is to prevent us from getting sued. That's HR's job.
Yes.
and the whole idea of coaching and engagement and is lost. I mean, if I'm a second level manager or I just got promoted. Let's use that, right? I went from being the superstar. Let's say I'm one of 15 people. Let's say I'm a mechanic in a car dealership, right? And I have to have a lead mechanic. The guy just quit after 40 years. Congratulations, Tim. You're now the boss of all your best friends. Good luck. and that's pretty much what happens, right? And then, the management of the dealership, they don't have time to coach you on how to become a new boss because they're worried about sales numbers and, customer returns and all the shit that's going on in their world. Now you got to make sure that your other 9 teammates actually come on time, that they come when they're scheduled to be there, right? That they perform the work in the time that's allocated to them by the standard work allocation book. Oh, well, this is kind of hard, right? Like, what if Bob tells me to F off? What do I do? Bob's bigger than me. I'm afraid of him. He's a bully.
And he has a big wrench in his hand.
And now what? Right. And then now Bob's made me look like an idiot. Everybody's going to go, Tim has no authority here. And, and then if I go to my boss, who's maybe the dealer manager, and he's like, I don't know what to do. Just go figure it out.
Yeah. Put you in the job that requires a whole new set of skills that you probably don't have, and I'm not willing to teach you. You're going to be very successful. Good luck.
Well, and even if I could give you all my skills as a supervisor, the challenge is that because we're human beings, we're all wired differently.
Yes.
And I had the privilege to go to the Center for Creative Leadership many, many years ago.
Great organization.
In Greensboro.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what was fascinating about that program, it was not all about ways to learn to manipulate people. It was just the opposite. It was all about learning about yourself and learning what are hardwired behaviors in our personalities and then what are programmable ones. Because if it's a leader, one of my weaknesses is I have a very much a bias to action, almost to the point of, I'm too quick to act and maybe not do enough analysis. So I have to be very conscious of that. But that can be also a strength and a weakness, right? So, but by learning that and being aware of it and knowing that I can't stop myself from being oriented to action. That's hardwired behavior. So how do I lean into that to take a benefit of that? And can I use it to offset other weaknesses that I may have as a person? But you got to start to know who you are. And most of us, I'm sorry to say, never get that unfiltered, true feedback. And it's hard to take. And when I went through this session with Center for Creative Leadership, they did a lot of, and you had, before you even came, it was months of preparation. And you had to do a 360 survey with your team, where they were giving you feedback and all the rest of the stuff. And then you go in. And at the end of the session, it was 6 days, and turned out to be all men. It was totally random that it was an all male class. Two of these guys, well, several CEOs, one Air Force general. I mean, these are very senior, experienced people. 2 people are open in tears at the end of the session about what they've learned and what they've learned about themselves. And that's what it takes sometimes. You got to go and it's got to get ripped off, and you got to go, you know what? I can be not as nice a guy as I think I am. And sometimes when I think that something is funny and people are all laughing, they're not laughing. They're not laughing they're not laughing at what I said. They're kind of laughing at me. And you need to be conscious of that. You need to be conscious of the room. You got to be conscious of the content and the culture, which is another thing, right? As we are all more virtual, you have to be kind of like a globalist in how you operate. At least we do. We're a very international company, and our team is from all over the place. So when we get together, it's we always joke that we're always celebrating somebody's feast day. As my Indian team member says, we have 300 million gods in India. Pick one. and we'll have a feast day for you. But that's the power of it. Anyway, so hey, Trent, really great to have you here today. I think we need to do more of these. We definitely need to get together for dinner one of these days. But I really want to thank you and thank your engagement and your participation in the work that we're doing around trying to really, engage with the human side of business and what we're trying to do here.
Absolutely. Always great to chat. Love what you guys are doing and happy to be a part of it.
Thanks, Trent. Have a great one and we'll catch up soon. Take care.
All right. Thanks.